Okay, welcome to GCSE Bitesize Revision. This is Unit 2, Germany 1918 to 1939. First of all, the first 4 PowerPoints are going to be about Section 1. So this is basically 1918 to 1923, Weimar Germany's problems. This first PowerPoint is centred on the Treaty of Versailles. Have a go, enjoy, try one of the exam questions at the end, and reward yourself with a sweetie or a chocolate biscuit or something nice. Okay, so what were the terms of the Treaty of Versailles 1919? The key thing to just remember, it was signed in 1919 by the November criminals. They were called the November criminals. These were the politicians, the German politicians who signed the treaty. It was signed in November, hence November, and criminals because people believed it was a crime that they'd gone ahead and signed it. People called it a Dolchstoß, or a stab in the back. And as you can see by the cartoon below, there's a German soldier in his trench still thinking the war's going on, and then you have a politician behind him literally stabbing him in the back, betraying him because he's ending the war with the treaty. Note that this politician is stylized as a Jewish person. The idea that the November criminals, the politicians who signed the treaty, were in fact Jewish. You can see that by the Star of David and the stereotypical features of a Jewish person often portrayed in German anti-Semitic political cartoons. It was a diktat. It was imposed on the Germans who had no say. They were not aware of it. They had no choice. And the terms of the treaty can be divided into 4 main areas. And hopefully this will be easy to remember. So social, territorial, economic and military. And if you want an easy way of remembering that, just think, right, the terms of the Treaty of Versailles equals STEM. Okay, so STEM just stands for the S, social, T, territorial, E, economic and M, military. STEM. So we're going to go through each one in turn. Firstly, social. So social is all about how the people were feeling because of the terms of the treaty. People really felt angry. It's this whole Dolchstoß thing again. Again, here's another cartoon on the right-hand side. You can see the politicians are again literally going up behind the trenches in World War I and stabbing the army in the back. People felt angry that they'd gone ahead and done this. So people turned their anger into supporting more extreme political parties. So you had extreme left-wing and extreme right-wing parties springing up in this time period. People also felt betrayed. They really felt like Germany could have won. They felt like these politicians went behind their backs and agreed to something that no one wanted. They also felt really humiliated. Article 231, the War Guilt Clause, made Germany take the total blame for the war. So it's not that they were just told that the war had to stop, but they were also made to take the whole of the blame. This would be a real awful thing to have to bear. The whole world blames you and your country. And finally, people felt desperate. There was everyday food shortages, soldiers coming home with no jobs, rioting on the streets. People felt really desperate. At this point, I'll just point out to you, there is something in red, and this is designed to help you if you're aiming for a C grade. The most important information is here for you to focus on. So anything in red is what you need to remember, the vital information for a C grade. Just point out this cartoon to you before we move on. So this is essentially summing up how people felt. Germany is the man with his hands behind his back walking towards a guillotine. A guillotine, of course, is a contraption designed to execute you, to kill you, to finish you off. The 3 people standing around are the politicians of the Allied countries who decided on the terms without Germany having a say. So from the left to the right, you've got Woodrow Wilson. You've got then Georges Clemenceau, he's the one holding the guillotine because it's a French contraption. And then on the right, you have Lloyd George, who is the British Prime Minister. Notice they're all looking at Germany, and Germany is going to get finished. The next effect of the Treaty of Versailles is the territorial effect. So what this means is essentially what land was lost. What did Germany have to give up out of its territory? It lost 50% of its iron reserves. Iron's really important for making weapons, but also other things like industrial things or engineering stuff. 50% of its iron reserves gone. 15% of its coal reserves gone. Coal is obviously a very important fuel, can also be used for trade. 13% in total of its European territory was also lost. It was given back to surrounding countries. Territory included the Saar and the Sudetenland, Alsace-Lorraine, Silesia, West Prussia and Danzig. The Saar and Sudetenland are the important ones to remember. The Saar, if you look on the map, is the little small black area of Germany. Even though it may be tiny, it had the majority of the coal and iron reserves in it. So even though it lost a very small amount of land, that land signified an incredible amount of Germany's wealth. The Sudetenland is the bit in pink that you can see. That was given to Czechoslovakia, and that had a lot of kind of people inhabiting it, so German citizens, but also quite a lot of kind of raw materials too. It also did lose colonies in Africa and the Far East, but the ones that really mattered to Germany were the ones closer to home. The economic terms of the Treaty of Versailles, well, this essentially means what money was lost, and we all know it was lots. Germany had to pay reparations of 6.6 billion to the Allies, even though it had no gold reserves left to back this up. So if you look at the cartoon on the right, you've got Germany as a really old, bedraggled horse, which simply can't cope with the weight of the debt that it's having to carry around, that it's having to bear. So the unlimited indemnity, as it's styled on the cartoon, is essentially the 6.6 billion reparations. Germany couldn't move forward with it, literally, as well as kind of metaphorically. And it was totally an unrealistic amount for them to pay. And not only the fact that they lost this money and had these debts to pay, but the territory that they lost made it difficult for Germany to then generate new wealth. So not only did it have to pay back money, but it lost the opportunity to make new money, because areas like Silesia, or we said before the Saar or the Sudetenland, they had the future of Germany's industry within them, the coal and the iron. The military effect is the final effect, and as you can see on the right, you've got some German soldiers in World War I. These German soldiers were a huge army. It was in the millions, the German army in World War I, and the Treaty of Versailles reduced it to simply 100,000 men. This sounds like a lot, but honestly, in relative terms, it really wasn't. Loads of people lost their jobs. Navy was limited, no submarines were allowed at all, no air force was allowed, the Rhineland was demilitarised. And what that means is, you see the sort of yellow stripy bit of land on the map below, that's the Rhineland, and it was an area of land between France and Germany. Essentially, it was demilitarised, which means no soldiers of German origin were allowed to be stationed in this area. This was to make France feel safer that Germany wasn't going to suddenly invade. But of course it also made Germany feel very vulnerable, because this was the area where the rest of their kind of remaining industry was. So for example, you can see on the map the Ruhr, which is in orange, that was still attached to Germany at the time, and it was where they had their coal and their iron reserves placed still, and they didn't have any opportunity to protect it with their own soldiers. So if they wanted to, France could just march in. Maybe they might do that in 1923. So in summary, the terms of the Treaty of Versailles 1919 can be remembered simply with that word STEM. Remember, S equals social, T equals territorial, E equals economic, and M equals military. And remember, the vital bits of information were in red. So you simply need to remember social effects, humiliation, the war guilt clause, total blame for the war. T, territorial, which means land, 50% of the iron reserves lost, and territory, including the Saar and the Sudetenland, was lost. E, economic, these are the huge reparations, the totally unrealistic reparations of 6.6 billion they had to pay, which left Germany bankrupt. And finally M, the military. The army was reduced to 100,000 men. Remember, that isn't very much at all. It had been in its millions. Loads of people lost their jobs. German soldiers were left jobless, and people were also left feeling like there was no protection for Germany, and Germany was vulnerable to attack itself. So finally, here's the bit you've all been waiting for, the exam question practice on the Treaty of Versailles. It's very exciting, but I don't want to excite you too much, because actually there's only so much they can ask you, and you don't really have to learn too much. This is an example of a 6-mark question, and essentially STEM, the social, the territorial, the economic and military aspects of the Treaty of Versailles, if you remember that, you just select from what you need to answer the question. So this brings me on to the most important point with any exam question, which is to read the question really carefully and then underline the key terms that are important. In this case, they're in bold. So I would read it through and underline what I think is important. So this is the measures taken in the Treaty of Versailles to limit German power. I would also then think, right, I'm going to keep using these two words all the way through my answers. So I'll use measures to introduce each point, and I'll use power to finish off my explanation of each paragraph. Here is another example of a 6-marker. Here, it's described Germany's territorial losses at the Treaty of Versailles. Now, you may have a little panic and think, a whole 6 marks on the territorial losses? I can't write 3 paragraphs about that. I've only learnt so much information. Well, this is where you can be really clever, because you just essentially work it towards what you do know, but still focused on the question. So start off with the bits that you do know about the territorial losses, the information that you've learnt, and then link it into two other areas, so the economic losses and the social losses, making sure it links back to land. So what I mean by this is, say if you've talked about the territorial losses, you've remembered that they lost 50% of the iron reserves, you remember there was somewhere called the Saar, which Germany lost. You might remember Alsace-Lorraine, for example. You can then go on to talk about the economic impact that this may have had, the fact that the Saar region contained lots of coal and iron. Then that will obviously mean that it has an effect on Germany's economy in order to build itself back up. You can then go on to talk about what impact this would have on the people, i.e. the social aspect, and therefore you've linked in all three areas and you've padded out a nice 6-mark question and impressed that really tired, cranky examiner who wants something new. This one, describe the effects of the Treaty of Versailles on Germany. Well, I don't need to say too much about this. Boom, STEM, social, territorial, economic, military, done. This one, slightly different because it centres around Hitler's views. So here you just need to make sure you focus on Hitler. But really, if it's Hitler's views, it's pretty much the views of the German people. So the bit of information we need to select is the social effects. So it's the S bit of your STEM. So remember, the social effects was the fact that they were angry, thought about Dolchstoß and Diktat. They thought they were November criminals that signed the treaty. You could bring out Hitler's anti-Semitism here, because remember, the November criminals were reputed to have been Jewish politicians. And then you could also basically sum it up and say that, Hitler's views about the Treaty of Versailles was that it should be scrapped. Now this last one is an 8-marker, and the difference between an 8-marker and a 6-marker is explanation of reasons, and you need to try and prioritise these reasons and make links between them. If this seems too challenging and you panic, don't worry, answer it like a 6-marker, and worst case scenario, you're going to get 6 out of 8, which is still, pretty good. If you want to try and prioritise and make links, you could think about it like this. Again, it's about why the German people disliked the treaty, so it's the social effects, it's how the German people felt about the treaty and why. So they felt angry. Why? Because of the diktat, because it was a dictated peace. They felt betrayed. Why? Because they felt it was a Dolchstoß, or a stab in the back. They felt humiliated. Why? Because of the war guilt clause, which meant they had to have blame from the whole of World War I. And they felt desperate. Why? Because they had shortages of food and jobs imposed on them because of the treaty. And if you're going to prioritise, the most important reason probably is the feeling of desperation, because no matter how political you were in Germany, the one thing that's going to affect you is whether you've got enough food, whether you've got enough money coming in, whether you can live. So the shortages is probably the most important reason why the German people dislike the Treaty of Versailles, the effect that it has on the day-to-day life. And on that note, let's have a go in your day-to-day life. Pick up a pen, get a piece of paper, have a go at one of these questions. Take 10 minutes on it, don't be shy, reward yourself with some nice sweets, a chocolate biscuit, or maybe a game on your PlayStation or whatever it is you kids do nowadays. Okay, bye!